Okay, so we're back now and we are on section 14C where we are looking at combining like terms. So combining like terms is when you have lots of different things on one side and you want to simplify it before you start moving things around to two different sides. So when I look at my first equation, we're going to do our normal step of drawing our line to indicate our two sides. And when we look at this side right here, actually technically, our slide does not include the word solve. We've got two terms that have an x. We have an 8x and we have a 5x. And so when we start combining like terms, we need to make sure that we're paying attention to the sign in front of the term. So what I have here is I have a positive 8x and then I have a positive 5x. So for the 5, I'm taking the sign in front of it. So what I'd want to do is I want to combine these two together. So I'd want to look at 8x plus 5x would give me 13x. So I combine them together, so now I have a much easier equation to work with. And now this is our simple two-step equations where we're always looking at addition or subtraction first. I have a minus 21, so I plus 21 on both sides. And then the minus 21 plus 21 cancel out, so I have 13x equals, and then these combine to become 6. Because it's 13 right next to x, that's 13 times x, undo times I divide. So divide by 13. And this does not simplify. 6 over 13, you could turn into a decimal if you want. It'd be pretty ugly. So I'm just going to leave this 6 over 13. And that's my answer. Okay, so on our next one, we're looking at it. We draw our line to indicate our two sides so we know what can combine. So on here, we're looking at, we've got two a terms. So we've got a 2a, right here, a positive 2a, and this one is a minus 8a, because I take that sign in front of the 8. So 2 minus 8, these two would combine to become negative 6a. That plus 3 stays here on this side. It's different because it doesn't have the letter. So we've got what we call our regular numbers or constants, and then we have our terms that have the variable. And so those are different terms, and only the ones that both have a variable can combine, or those are just numbers that can combine. Okay, so from here we have 8, and now we've got our two-step equation. Looking at getting rid of plus or minus first, this is plus 3, so I'm minus 3 on both sides. So now I have negative 6a equals 8 minus 3 is 5. I divide both sides by negative 6 because that's negative 6a. Since they're side by side, it's multiplication. So to undo that, I divide. And the 6's cancel, the negatives cancel, leaving us just with that a. And so again, this fraction cannot reduce. So I can leave it the way it is, or I can turn it into a decimal. Again, I choose to leave it as a fraction. And with these fractions, it doesn't matter where you put the negative. It can be on the bottom, like up here. Or for me, I like to move it to the top so that way it's front and center and I know it's negative. I don't tend to forget about it. And that's our basic idea of combining like terms. So now we're going to move on to the next one. Same ideas, same practice. We draw our line. I look at this side. I've got this 8x, and then I have the minus 9x. So 8 minus 9 is negative 1. So this is negative 1x, and then I still have that plus 12. So I combined these two together, and that's equal to 28. Now I've got my normal two-step equation. I move my 12 to the other side. Since it's plus 12, I minus 12. I have a negative 1x equals 16. And now I'm going to get rid of that negative 1. Since that's side by side with the x, that indicates multiplication. So I divide by negative 1. If it's multiplication, I divide by the exact same thing. So 1 divided by 1 cancels, negatives cancel, leaving us with x. On this side, 16 divided by negative 1 gives me negative 16. Okay, for our next example, again, draw our line, indicate our two sides. That way we know we have too much on one side. And so I've got a 2y, and this is a positive 5y because I'm taking that sign in front of the 5. And so 2y plus 5y gives me 7y. Now I still have this minus 7 here, so I'm going to keep that there on that side, and that's equal to 0. Now I move everything away from the y, starting with the minus 7, so I add 7 to both sides. So that minus 7 and plus 7 becomes 0. Double check that. So now I'm left with the 7y on this side. 0 plus 7 is 7. Now this is a 7 right next to the y. So again, that's indicating multiplication. To undo multiplication, I divide. So divide by 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1. 1y is the same thing as y. And here, 7 divided by 7 is the number 1. And that's our answer. Okay, so now we're going to make it even tougher, because if we're not pushing you and pushing you, we're just not doing our jobs. And so we're always stretching you, trying to get you further and further, always challenging you, but hopefully not too much where you're just frustrated and give up. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do the combining like terms and distributive property. And the rule is always do the distributive property first. Always distributive property first. Big stars right there. Distributive property first. So if there's a parentheses, you got to get rid of that, and then you combine like terms. Okay, so I'm going to draw my line for my two sides. I see a parenthesis, so I take this number in front, this positive 2. I'm going to multiply it inside. So this 4D is just hanging out here. I'm just going to write him out here. Nothing's changing with him yet. But over here, I'm going to have a 2 times 6, which is a positive 12. And then a 2 times, now remember, this is a minus 3D there. So 2 times a minus 3 gives me a negative 16. Now from here, I'm looking at those like terms. I see two things that have a D. So 4D, and then I take the sign here, negative 6D. So 4 minus 6 gives me negative 2D. So now I'm back to that two-step equation. I move everything away from the D, starting with plus or minus. So I have that plus 12, so I'm minus 12 on both sides. I have a negative 2D left on this side, and over here we have, it looks like 14. Now that's a negative 2 right next to a D, which indicates multiplication, and to undo multiplication we divide. So I divide by negative 2 on both sides. The 2's cancel, the negatives cancel, leaving us just with that D. 14 divided by 2 is 7. The negative does not cancel out, so the answer is negative. Okay, so for our next equation, same idea. I have a parentheses. Let's draw my line to indicate the sides. We're going to get rid of that 4, so I'm multiplying it only inside the parentheses. 4 times x, 4 times minus 2. So 4 times x gives me that 4x. 4 times minus 2 gives me minus 8. And then I have this 2x that wasn't inside the parentheses, so it's just hanging out. Nothing's changing with him yet. And on the other side, we have our 40. Now that the parentheses are gone, we can look at combining like terms. So I've got two things with an x, so I'm combining those. So a 4x plus 2x becomes 6x. So remember, I'm taking that sign in front of the 2, not the minus in front of the 8, because the minus belongs to the 8. So these combine, give me that 6x. Then I have the minus 8, and over here we have 40. Now I can move everything away from the x because everything's nice and simplified. Starting with that minus 8, I plus 8 on both sides. So now I have 6x equals 48. That's a 6 right next to an x, which indicates multiplication. To undo multiplication, we divide. So I divide by 6 on both sides. 6 divided by 6 becomes 1. So now I have a 1x, which is the same thing as x. And then 48 divided by 6, I believe, is 8. And so our answer is x equals 8. Not so bad once you kind of get the hang of it. The more you practice it, the better you get, and the more it just becomes second nature to you. Okay, so let's look at some more problems. So these ones are a little bit trickier, and so I like to bring these to your attention so you kind of see what's going on. So in our first one, again, we're getting rid of the parentheses, so we're multiplying. But this is really a minus 4. So when I'm multiplying in by a minus 4. So the 10y is just hanging out because he's not involved. And then I'm multiplying in that minus 4. So minus 4 times y is a minus 4y. A minus 4 times 8 becomes a negative 8. And that's equal to that negative 20. So now I'm going to draw my line because I kind of moved everything over. I still have two of the y's on the same side. So I have this 10y minus 4y. So I'm going to combine those. So 10 minus 4 gives me 6. So this becomes a 6y. That minus 8's hanging out. The minus 20's hanging out. Now I can move everything away. So I start off with that minus 8. I add 8 to both sides. So the minus 8 plus 8 turns to 0. I'm left with 6y. Negative 20 plus 8 gives me negative 12. Now that 6 is right next to the y, so that means times. To undo times, I divide. So divide by 6 on both sides. So now I have y equals negative 2. That's it. Okay, so our next one is even more complicated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite it a little bit because I find that rewriting it helps me not make a mistake. So when I rewrite this x, a lot of times I've said that x is really 1x is the same thing as x. So I don't write the 1, but here I want to write the 1. I want to indicate there is a number there. So I have a 1x minus, now there's no number here because 1 is that one number that has like invisibility superhero properties. So we can make him invisible or we can make him show up. And for this problem, we're going to make him show up. So I have my 1 here, and then if there's no number, there's a 1 here, and then 12, and then minus, and then again, I'm going to put in that 1x. And this just keeps me from making silly little mistakes. So I was one of those people that was a negative dropper and always had issues with negative. So I really try and harp and help reinforce over and over and over little problems that tend to happen with negatives because I don't want you going through the same thing I did. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and distribute. And because my problem is kind of messy, I'm going to go ahead and draw my arrows below. So I'm multiplying in this 1, but this 1 is not just a 1. It's a minus 1. So I'm multiplying in by a minus 1 or a negative 1. And so we have this 1x hanging out, just chilling, waiting for everything to calm down. So negative 1 times 12 becomes negative 12. A negative 1 times negative 1 becomes a positive 1. And so now I've got these x's on the same side, so I have to combine them. So I'm looking at a 1x plus 1x. And 1x plus 1x gives me 2x. I still have that negative 12 hanging out, just waiting. And then a 38 on the other side. He's the really lonely one. So we're going to move things towards him. So we're going to go ahead and move that minus 12. So I add 12 to both sides. So now I have 2x equals 40, 50. Now that 2 is right next to the x, so that's times. So to undo times, I divide. I divide by 2 on both sides. So now I have x equals 25. And that is probably one of the most complicated types of distributive combining like terms problems because there's all those invisible ones in there, and if you're not careful, those negatives will get you every single time. Or because there's not a 1 there, you get distributing in an x instead of the 1, and there's just lots and lots of rooms for a mistake. So this is a really, really good example. If you can, star it for yourself so you can always come back and find it as being, this is the hardest type of problem that you would probably see when it comes to using both distributive property and combining like terms. So we're almost done because we're on page 4 or 5. And again, just more of the same. The more you can see this, the better off you are. So we're drawing our line. We're going to get rid of the parentheses, so I'm going to multiply in by 5. Only inside the parentheses again. So 5 times 1 gives me 5. 5 times minus 2 gives me minus 10. And then I have this 8w hanging out here just waiting for his turn. So now that I've got rid of the parentheses, I'm combining my like terms. Now a lot of these problems are combining our variable terms. But that's not always the case. This one is though. So I have a negative 10w and a positive 8. So a negative 10 plus 8 would give me negative 2. So this 5's chilling here. These combine to give us a negative 2w. And that's equal to 15. So now I'm moving everything away from the w. Now remember, we've done one of these before where this is my variable. So when I'm moving things away, I move with the number that's not directly next to it. So what's directly next to it is that -2 right here. I don't want to move that. I want to move this 5. So this is really positive 5. So to move it, I'm -5. So when I get rid of that 5 minus 5, that becomes 0, so it's gone. I'm now left with a -2w. And remember, I'm always leaving that 1 right next to the letter for the last step. So 15 minus 5 is 10. And now, because those are side by side, it's multiplication and undo multiplication, I divide. And I divide by that exact same number. So 2 divided by 2, negatives cancel, leaving us just with w. 10 divided by 2 is 5. There's not another negative to cancel out, so the answer is negative. Okay, so this is what I was kind of talking about or alluding to the last problem. Again, we draw our line. We distribute that 2 inside. So this 3 is just out here chilling. 2 times m is 2m. 2 times -8 is -16. And all of our other problems we've had 2 x's or 2 y's or 2 a's or 2 w's. This one I don't. I just have the 1m term, the 2m, just one of those terms. But I do have what we would call 2 constants. I have the 3 and the -16. So we're going to combine those two because they're similar. They can combine. So what's 3 minus 16? Well, that would be -13. So I'm going to combine that to become the -30. But I still have this 2m hanging out. So 2m's here. And I used to always say they're like apples and oranges. If it has an M, it's an apple. If it has just the number, it's an orange. And we can't combine them. They're different. We can't combine them at all. So we only combine those that are alike. Regular numbers and those that have the letters. So from here, we're at our 2-step equation. To undo -13, we add 13. So this becomes 0. We're left with a 2m. That's equal to 20, 30. There we go, 30. And then that's 2 right next to an m, which indicates multiplication. So to undo multiplication, I divide by 2 on both sides. So those cancel out, and m is 15. And that's it. Okay. We'll see you guys for section 1.5.